out. There are some notes there in the bulletin. For those online, I shared that to our messenger group this morning, so you should have those as well. And some questions there for afterwards. But Genesis 31, we'll continue this week. We started there last week. We'll continue the story this morning. Genesis 31. We'll start in verse 22. All right. As you find your place, I was reminded this week, Christina and I, and we like watching, and I know many of you do too, many of those crime investigative shows that are on TV. And I particularly like the ones where, and we've all seen them, where somebody on the team will go rogue, right? They'll go and try to do their own mission. If you've watched NCIS, you know Gibbs does this all the time. If you had $1 for every time he did it, you'd have $100 or whatever, because he does it all the time. But my favorite part is when they're out there and they're trying, and he finds himself in a tough situation, and all of a sudden he realizes that this might be it. This might be the end. And all of a sudden his team shows up and they save him. And he realizes the importance of his teammates and his partners and all those things. And, as I read over this passage this week, I was reminded that God often acts in a similar way. Here's what I mean. You see, we can be going throughout our day, things happen, and often we take those things for granted, and then all of a sudden, it's not until afterwards that we see that God was there all along working in the background or working at the forefront, and we just didn't realize it. You see, God is always working in our life, and this morning, we're going to find that Jacob is going to come to this understanding as well. He's going to finally recognize God's divine providence. So let's dive in, and you'll see exactly what I mean. First, God protects his own. Look at verse 22 through verse 25. God protects his own. Verse 22, when it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled. If you remember, Jacob came up with that secret plan with his wives to get out because he saw Laban wasn't treating him well. He was afraid of Laban, and now they're on the run. And this is where we come to. Laban's found out. Jacob fled. Laban takes his kinsmen with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban, the Aramean, in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. Now sure enough, we saw the plan last week, and you could read the writing between the lines that Laban's not going to be very happy with this plan Jacob and Rachel and Leah have come up with. And you can imagine the emotional anger Laban is probably experiencing. Now, his daughters are gone. His grandkids are gone. Probably several workers that he had through Jacob were gone. And truthfully, his main source of wealth, Jacob, he's gone. So you can imagine the anger Laban must have been experiencing him, so he chases down Jacob. Now, it probably took 7 to 10 days. Imagine Jacob and all his families traveling along. It's going to take a while to get to where they need to go. So Laban catches up to him, but once again, we find God protects his own. God protected Jacob. Now, if you remember, back with Abraham and Isaac, they found themselves in a similar situation, and God intervened through a dream at that time to save those people. You see, God intervened here as well to save Jacob because Laban wasn't known as a very mild-mannered person, if you will. Laban overtook Jacob. Now, there's many times in our lives that we find ourselves in a tough spot, and we wonder, God, why did you allow that to happen the way it happened? And many times, it's not until we see or we go through those situations that we get to see that God was the one acting. For instance, one story. I don't think Christina even knows this story, but when I was a kid, my grandma was driving. I'm in the passenger seat, and my sister was in the back, and we're driving home one night, and for some reason, and I still can't explain it, I put my seat back. I was laying back in the seat, and then all of a sudden, all I remember, because I blacked out, was the window shattered, and my grandma was pulling off the side of the road. Well, unbeknownst to me, because I blacked out, a huge, large deer punctured through the window, and if I had had my seat where it was, I would have been right there, and it probably would have hit me. It's situations like that that we look back and we say, I have no explanation. But we see that God was the one actively protecting me in that moment and in that situation that I was in. You may be asking, whatever situation you're in today, what in the world could God be doing with this? Why in the world could God be allowing this thing to happen? Well, what is God going to do with this situation? I can't see it. Why am I in it? And maybe even Jacob found himself wondering those same questions as Laban overtook him. Remember this. I thought about this week. Jacob would never have known that God had protected him unless he had allowed Laban to catch up to Jacob. You see, Jacob would have never understood all the things God had done for him unless Laban had caught up with him, and Laban, as we'll see, tells Jacob all that God had done. Let's look at the next part in verses 26 through 35. God knows his own. God knows his own. Verse 26. Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done, that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with myrrh and songs and tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your fathers spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you long greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Remember those idols Rachel took. Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of woman is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. All right, God knows his own even when they suffer on this earth. Now, Laban confronts Jacob in a very interesting way, and we see Moses writing this. He lays it out in this argumentation fashion. Laban comes before Jacob, and here's his case. "Jacob, you tricked me. You tricked me more than once. You did these things to me. Jacob, you kidnapped my daughters, my two daughters that you're married to, but you took them away from me. Jacob, you fled secretly. You went about this the wrong way. I wanted to send you off with a proper send-off, the ceremonies, and that's where the tambourine and the lyre and all those things come into being. Jacob, you acted foolishly. You should not have done this way. Laban believes he would be just in hurting Jacob, but what do we find again? God protects his own. God protected Jacob. Now, the interesting part that I find about this is that Laban seems not to be bothered that Jacob wants to leave, but he's more concerned about those household idols, those household figurines, those God things that he has that he wants back. And we see a glimpse here that Laban is a devout pagan worshiper. He really wants those things back. So Jacob responds. What's he say? He was afraid. We know Laban's track record. He had tricked Jacob several times into different things. He was afraid of him. He wasn't sure how Laban would respond. Jacob didn't know that Rachel took those stolen idols, those stolen figurine God things. So he invites Laban. He says, back up your accusations with facts. He's saying, I've not done anything real wrong here. Back up all these accusations you're coming at me with. Now, we find again, Rachel, it's interesting towards the end of this passage. It's interesting because this is how dishonesty works, isn't it? Rachel has to cover up her lying with another lie. She has to cover up her dishonesty with more dishonesty. And oftentimes in our lives, we see that's how lying works. One lie leads to another lie to another lie. And the process just keeps going on and on. And I look at this and I say, for what? A figurine? This little idol thing, this little God thing that they worship that can't do anything for them? That's what they're lying about? That's what she wants to keep secret from her father? Now, we get a glimpse here of just how enticing idols can be in people's lives, in our lives. You see, Rachel was even willing to risk her life to hold on to these little idols that she had, little figurine things she had. Now, to better understand this, we would have to jump forward a book to Exodus, because we're not going to this morning, but Moses writing this. Imagine, if you will, your Genesis, Exodus, Israelite history for a moment. Remember, Moses led the people out of Egypt, and then he comes and he starts writing these first 5 books of the Bible. He's writing these things down, and he's stressing, and you find different things stressed throughout Genesis that maybe you think, why was that stressed? But if we put ourselves in that time frame that Moses finds himself with Israel, these things make a lot more sense. And here's why. Why would Moses stress this idolatry so clearly in this passage in Genesis? And here's why I believe he does. In Egypt, the Israelites had all sorts of gods and figurines that the Egyptians worshiped. They had the sun god and the water god, and they had all these things that they could physically see and that oftentimes they could actually touch, and they believed that they would get certain things from them. But what happened? Moses leads them out. They're supposed to worship the one true God, but they can't see him. They can't touch him. And then things get hurt or hard. They start getting hungry in the desert. They start getting thirsty in the desert. Life starts getting very, very hard for these Israelites as they're wandering around in the desert. And all of a sudden they're thinking, well, maybe those gods weren't so bad. Maybe those idols. And we even find that they build a golden calf at one point. You see, they were still attached or holding on to some of those past idols. And it's clear that hard times make these false idols very, very enticing. For instance, those who are in financial trouble may turn to stealing. Those who are under pressure at work, they may turn to alcohol, drugs, you name it. Those who are sick may turn to some kind of false healer for the answer. And those idols that they're hoping for temporary relief cannot care for their soul. So what's the better answer? Well, I believe Jesus says it right. Matthew 11:28 through 30. He says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." See, Jesus is the answer. Jesus is the one they should be turning to, especially when these false, enticing idols enter our lives. We have to say no, but look to Jesus for lasting comfort and strength. Now, last, let's look at verses 36 through 42. God cares for his own. God cares for his own. In the last section, we saw Laban laying out his little argument here, and now we're going to see Jacob's retort. Verse 36, "Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, 'What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. For my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was. By day the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." It's a fascinating passage here that we're going to break down a little bit more, but we find here that God is showing care for Jacob. And Jacob, I think for the first time, really begins to see that God is the one intervening and working in his life. Now, obviously, Jacob, he's had enough of Laban's accusations. You can kind of read into this that he was probably pretty heated when he was responding to Laban's accusations. We get the sense that that whole became angry and berated Laban. He was probably pretty heated at this moment. He was not happy with all these accusations. He says, "Did I sin against you? Did I take anything? Did you find anything? No, you haven't. So what's your cause for pursuing me so hotly?" Jacob even asks a third party from each side to come and kind of come to a resolution for this issue that they find themselves in. And Jacob, he registers his complaint that he had even borne losses at the expense of what should have been Laban's expense. Laban should have paid for the ones that had been lost, those rams that had been lost to wild beasts. That was common cultural practice at that time, but Jacob even took that on and did it himself. Now, we get this exchange, and to better understand it, Olivia, throw up the next thing. This is, and I've referenced this before, but the Code of Hammurabi. This was the typical law system, and you could do a quick search online. You'll find out all you need to know, but this was a Babylonian code used during that day, and we find that actually playing out here. The Mosaic Law had not come into being yet, so this is often, and it was probably one of the first sets of different laws that we find in history that has been found intact, even dating back to 1754 BC. Now, it covered things like slander, fraud, slavery, duties of workers, theft, trade, liability, divorce, adultery, and perjury. This was a pretty specific law, and you see these two using this kind of in this interchange as they're talking. Jacob is referring back to this because Laban would have followed this in his dealings. So Jacob knows that Laban knows these things, but he's not following these things. So Jacob ends his argument with the ultimate statement that I think we see here in this passage about that God has allowed Jacob to prosper to this point. God has shown care to Jacob up to this point. Now, he uses that phrase, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac. What does that mean? Well, that word for fear, you could translate it almost awesome one. The awesome one of Isaac, the God, the ultimate God of his father Isaac, the awesome God that we serve is the one who has been on Jacob's side this whole entire time. Now, I believe this is one of the clearest evidences that Jacob is beginning to see that there is nothing he is doing to deserve what he is getting. He doesn't deserve anything that is happening, but God has been faithful to him. He's no longer, and we read this in the early days of Jacob, he trusted his wits and his deception. He's no longer relying on any of those things, but he's starting to see that this is ultimately in God's hands. He finally realizes that he needs more and more of God's grace. God is the one who has allowed Jacob to prosper. Now, isn't that the same way with us? You see, when we begin to grow more and more selfless, we begin to see that we are more and more dependent on God for what we have. Now, I was thinking about this story the other day. Christina will remember this. Olivia, the first one, you always do tons more stuff than the older ones because, well, it starts costing more. So one time, Christina will smile, we were at the Cincinnati Zoo. And I reminded of it this week. Olivia was in this stroller, but we didn't have her strapped in. But at the zoo, there's this one part where you walk across this bridge, and below you is where the lions and things are. So we're walking across, and we're looking at them. It's pretty cool, and they're all out there, and we're watching. Olivia's maybe 1, 2, somewhere in that range. And somebody tells us, your baby's climbing out of the stroller, which was not uncommon. She was very self-determined as a child. So she's climbing out of the stroller, and I look down. I go, oh, well, she's right there. So we reach down, we get her and put her back in. Now, I was reminded of that this week because oftentimes we are not aware of all the care and the grace that God shows to us. How often does God protect us and we don't even know? We're not even recognizing God's care for us. So how do we get better at that? How do we better recognize God's care for us? And here's 3 suggestions. First, I think it's important that we start our day with God. And here's what I mean. Maybe it's on your way to work. Maybe it's on your just your morning routine, starting your day in prayer. Maybe spending a few minutes, taking some time to dive into your Bible, read a scripture. There's several apps, even on your phone now, that give you a short, maybe 5-10 minute devotional that you can read through in the morning. But for no other reason, it gets your mind focused and thinking on God for that day. Now, second, take time to thank God throughout your day. When you do recognize God's moments of care for you or His protection or whatever, take time to thank Him, pray to Him, thank Him. And I think it's important that we don't just read a passage of Scripture. It's more than just reading. And I think the more important part is the meditation upon that passage. How does this passage apply to me every single day? And then third, end your day with God. Pray. Thank God for the day. Thank Him for all He's done. Take time and maybe even write down. This is, I know my mom got Olivia this cool little journal book at night she's been working through that just says, what was a highlight of your day? What did God do that day that you can recognize and attribute to God? Just write those things down. Thank God for all those things. Now, let me conclude with this. If you're not a Christian, if you're not a believer, you are in a similar situation that Laban was. He clearly saw that there was a higher God, a higher being working in Jacob's life, but he rejected that God. He rejected the one true God of the Bible. He didn't want anything to do with that God. He just wanted the benefits that came with having Jacob around. Now, if you're hearing this today, and I know several are watching, don't just listen to it, but take steps to trust the Lord with your life. Trust the beauties of this gospel message that we hold in our hands today. Trust that Jesus can forgive you of any past transgression or sin that you may have committed. Trust that He will never leave you nor forsake you, no matter what you are going through. Trust Jesus with your life today. Now, if we're a Christian, there's some truths here for us as well. We saw this morning, and these are for you. God protects His own. If you're a Christian, God is your protector. You have the God of this great universe on your side. He is with you. Whether in this life or the next, we have nothing to fear because God is our protector. God knows you. He knows His own. He knows you in the most personal and intimate way possible. He knows what you're thinking. He knows what you're going to do. He knows what you've been through, but He is on your side. He takes care of His own. And then last, God does truly care for you. You are His. He is yours. Take your burdens, your fears, and I know we have many, those anxiety thoughts, those troubles that are just fill our minds so many times, and we can't quite figure out what to do. Maybe it's anger, maybe it's fear. Whatever it is, take them and lay them down at the foot of the cross. Take them to Jesus because He is the only one that can give you lasting comfort. Why? Because He is on your side. Jesus is on your side. So you can face Monday. You can face tomorrow. You can face whatever is thrown at you this week because God is on your side. I'll leave you with the words of Paul. Romans 8, a few verses there. It says, "What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, danger, or sword? No. In all these things, we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord." Let us pray. Father, thank you this morning that this is the type of love and grace that we experience as Christians. Now, I know there are hard times in our lives where it's easy to forget many of these things. We forget that you have promised to care for us and protect us, and yet we need these reminders in your scriptures and stories like this about Jacob, where we get to see you working his life. You are the same God then that you are now, and we can trust you today. Help us to do that more, to humbly come before you and trust that you know what is best and you are on our side. And in your name I pray. Amen. As Olivia pulls up our closing song, please stand with me this morning.